think of it like this. The brain is not intelligent. It's a very complex structure, but the brain itself is not intelligent. What is intelligent is your consciousness, my consciousness, using that brain. And I think that the way to think about AI is that it will never achieve intelligence, but it may act as a gateway for an intelligence. And I think that's where I would agree with the idea of an alien intelligence, in the sense that we don't know what forms of consciousness exist in the cosmos, and we don't know how they can come to express themselves.
This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
Hello, everyone. And so I am here with Dr. Iain McGilchrist. Everyone who watches my channel knows who he is, but a wonderful, interesting new development in his life is that he is now the chancellor of Ralston College. I'm really excited about that. I feel like, with Jordan being busy and also being sick, Dr. Iain McGilchrist is such a wonderful addition to the college, a perfect fit. But as you know, he's also a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist. He wrote the Matter with Things, which is his most recent massive volume that tries to look at the relationship, obviously, again, with the brain and philosophy and culture. And so it's great to see you, Iain.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking.
So maybe we can start with this. What is it that made you move in this direction of? I mean, I've been a fan of Ralston now since it started. I really love what they're doing. I feel like it is, in some ways, it's so counterintuitive in terms of how all society is going. But I feel like that is really the direction to go, is to create in some ways an true intellectual elite. So what is it that attracted you to this position?
First of all, that I was honored to be asked, I suppose, but no, I felt I'd made a very close bond with Ralston when I went to deliver the Sophia lectures there. And I was made to feel very welcome, and I felt completely at home, which is unusual because I find that most intellectual and educational institutions these days seem quite a long way from where I feel they should be. But I immediately felt that this was a kindred body, that were engaged in a very important project, which is really to do with nothing less than rehumanizing education and rehumanizing society. Yeah. It may sound a little strange to say that, because superficially we are still sending our young humans to these educational institutions, but more and more education at school level and even at university level is devoid of a number of things. It's devoid of the really all-important context of the culture out of which we come. And, one of the most bizarre features of our society now, and it can be explained, is that we are effectively committing suicide. We are the honored recipients, the inheritors of one of the greatest movements that the world has ever seen, that of Western civilization. And in the early days of my life, I was quite a critic of Western civilization, and I've always felt very much the pull of Eastern ways of thinking. And that's not unusual in the Western tradition. There are plenty of people in that tradition, Whitehead above all, who has. But increasingly, I feel it's so important not to be robbed of all that is miraculously good in it. things that we take for granted, like the idea of the balance between an individual and society, neither dominating over the other, the idea of democracy, the idea of the coming together of knowledge across the sciences and the humanities. These things are terribly important. And I think that we're losing sight of them. And if you wanted to destroy a society or a civilization, what you would do is you would obliterate that culture's past, and you would say that it was toxic and terrible, and you would leave people in a very vulnerable and disorientated position in which they didn't know what to believe or what to doubt. And I think that's where we've gone. Now, I'm not suggesting, above all, I'm not suggesting that a critical mind is not important. I've always tended to be a little irritatingly sort of on the other side of whatever argument is currently going on. So, I mean, I call myself a believer among skeptics and a skeptic amongst believers. So I do think it's very, very important to hold both sides of, or many sides of anything you're talking about. But that is now rare. And what Ralston is doing is offering people a grounding in their own history and culture, in the humane ideas that have emerged from it, and really to understand and live that, not just to sort of checkbox a few ideas, but to sort of internalize it and live it as a way of being in the world.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I feel exactly the same. And, one of the interesting things about Ralston is that in some ways it sometimes can feel like a drop in an ocean of chaos, like here's this little thing
Yes.
that is just, but that's actually how seeds function. That's how the difference in quality. And, if you can form even just a few people with the quality they need to kind of be transformative people, that's how the future is made. It's actually not made through mass transformation. It's made through the transformation of people.
You're so right. And I can't remember the precise wording of it, but the famous quote from Margaret Mead, that never doubt that a small group of people can completely change the road or the path of a civilization. In fact, nothing else ever has. So,
Yes,
I mean,
right.
we really require these small groups of people who they don't have to become fanatical. They only have to truly believe what it is they know and know what it is they truly believe. And that's a huge contrast with the generality of public discourse these days, where I think there's a lot of dishonesty. I think there's a lot of pretending. I think there's a lot of pretending to believe impossible things and dismissing things that are clearly true because they don't happen to fit a political ideology. So I think we really deeply need to get back to people who are grounded in an awareness of, in a scholarly study of the civilization that we represent, not at the exclusion of any other one. In fact, one of the things about Western civilization is that it has been open to the influences from the East, going back to ancient Greece and then coming through to the Renaissance. There are important strands that come here from Eastern and from Judaic and other roots that are not Central European ones.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You see it in, even I was reading the Legends of Alexander the Great, and, he does this great trek to India to meet with the Brahmins, the naked philosophers. And so this is something that's been around forever, like this idea of this
Yes.
connection to the East. Yeah, definitely.
And there was a great trade between and movement of ideas between India and the Eastern Mediterranean a couple of thousand years ago. And I think that it's no coincidence that Heraclitus seems almost like a Taoist. I'm sure that such ideas must have come to Greece at around this time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so everyone, all the young people that are watching, this is your call. There's something beautiful happening in Ralston. Inscriptions are open. If it's something that you're thinking about, if if it's something that if you want to go on an amazing adventure, and it's hard to describe how wonderful what it is that they go through is, because it's completely imbibe. You know, they live together, they eat together, they travel, they go to Greece, and it's if I was in my 20s, I would be fighting to get to Ralston, that's for sure.
Yes, that's right. And if I had to, design a small new university college, it would be along the very lines that Ralston has. And I just want to say, if young people are thinking about it, that I really have never been in an intellectual community that seemed to me so benign, in which people were very bright, imaginative, absolutely non-dogmatic, open to things, interested in learning, and it's just a joyous experience being among them.
Yeah. All right, and so that brings us to pivot to the thing that Ralston in some ways is resisting, to the great current that is happening to us. And so obviously everybody knows that we definitely need to talk about artificial intelligence. I've been hoping and waiting to hear a little bit about what your insight is. Things are moving very fast, and there's this constant talk about general intelligence, whatever that means. And seems like a muddling of the words. It seems like they don't understand the words that they use. People are using words like intelligence, like consciousness, like all of these words, but they don't seem to have a ground. They're just using them to get maybe financing or to do, we're not sure exactly what's going on, but it's moving at an insane speed. And the capacity of these LLMs is increasing. I mean, if you've tried GPT-4 and then GPT-5, you can tell the difference. Like there is an increased capacity, but the machines still completely constantly hallucinate, and there's all of that going on. But it's mostly the sense of displacement that I think is the most disturbing. Is the way in which people are relinquishing to the machine. In some ways, they're abdicating to these machines almost without just doing it because it's easier, maybe, or something like that. And so I would definitely like to hear you talk about what you see that's going on. Let's say, obviously, there's the machines themselves, but as a general societal motion, because there's something driving this. Like there's a desire, there's something that is driving us towards this goal here.
Ah, yes. Well, as you know, Jonathan, there's so much to say about all of that, but let's just think of a few things, and one which is a little tangential is why this is happening is partly to do with the seduction of ease and the lack of will to engage with anything that offers resistance. I happen to believe that, and it's a side issue, but I do happen to believe very strongly that creativity requires resistance, and in the absence of resistance, creativity simply won't happen. And I think what we've got used to is a world which is seductively easy, in which we can be largely passive and feel we can do what we want. And we've had very little pushback. And I think that when there are stories of sinister or evil forces impinging on humanity, it's often in terms of them offering seductively greater ease, greater wealth, greater power, greater luxury, whatever it is. So I think, although that's not intellectually the core of it, that is an important thing to be thinking about. More important, I think, is and I know you expect me to say this, but the way in which our society has drifted into an understanding, if you can even dignify it with the word an understanding, of the world which is purely that of the left hemisphere, without the complicating and sophisticating and reality-orientating effect of the right hemisphere. So there's an easy, lazy, completely morally and intellectually bankrupt vision of the world, which is that of reductive scientific materialism. That the world is made up of things. Those things are isolated from one another, but can bump into one another, and they are basically meaningless, purposeless, valueless, and aimless. I don't think that young people, frankly, are tolerating this. And it's a wonderful thing to see that more and more people, much, much younger than myself, inevitably, are pushing back against this. They are returning, I gather, to, and maybe the idea is a little exaggerated, I don't know, but they are returning to places of worship, that they are also pushing back against the idea of the meaningless and pointlessness of their lives and the concepts of purposelessness and valuelessness, which people imagine science has taught us that the world is without purpose and without value. But science can do no such thing. Science starts from saying, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the world from a standpoint that excludes the idea of purpose or value. And it's a very reasonable thing to do. And it's been extremely profitable in looking at mechanisms. But the one thing it can't do at the end of the day is say we didn't find any values or purpose because you ruled them out from the start. And I sometimes remember this, I think it comes from Lewis's preface to Paradise Lost, where he sort of says, it's rather like a policeman stopping all the traffic in the street and then solemnly writing in his notebook, the silence in this street is most suspicious. And we can't ask science to talk about these things. It's not equipped to do so. But they are very, very real. And I didn't realize when I was writing The Matter with Things that I would actually have a separate chapter on values and a separate chapter on purpose towards the end of the book. And I did. And I think they're very important things to talk about. But I suppose at the heart of what your question was putting to me was the idea of what intelligence is, what consciousness might be. And are they the same as acquisition of information? I see AI as not artificial intelligence, but as artificial information processing, which it does exceptionally well. And that's largely because of piggybacking off what humanity has given. It simply sucks it all up. And of course, because of electrical circuitry, it can bring things together very fast. But what it's doing is simply parasitical on things it has heard that, or not even heard because it can't, but has acquired information that human beings have said or done. And of course, it can mimic a response that a human being might make. And in the 18th century, there were already clunky, brazen-headed machines that would sort of speak in a manner of speaking. What's really happened is that we've just taken this very, very much further, but it's still the same thing in my view.
To kind of play the devil's advocate, one of the things that I realize is that, of course, the machine, it is an extension of us, right? It has to be, because at first, when they tried to make the LLMs, the LLMs would just hallucinate and go crazy. Like when they tried to feed it just with all the information, and so they had to create training. They had to train it. They basically had to have humans telling it, and thousands, we do it without even knowing. People don't realize it. Like when you're using a CAPTCHA or when you're doing all these things online, what you're doing is you're telling the AI, this is good, this is bad, this is the right, this is the thing. And so there's a sense in which there is a human mind. There is some aspect of a human mind that is behind what the machine is doing, because we have, through iterations, told it what is good and what is bad, what is good and what is bad. And so is there a way in which, in its proper place, these machines could play a role of a kind of extension of the human intelligence? Or do you think that that's because it's so powerful that it's like a parasite that that will eat us,
Well, I think it certainly can help us. But I'm not sure that the risk attached to further development in any way outweighs the value of it being a servant. This is a problem because it's not just that it reflects something that we want, but it actually reflects a whole aspect of a human being, which is embodied in the left hemisphere. It's about gaining control through understanding mechanisms and procedures that will influence the world. And it's about gaining power for oneself. And it embodies a certain way of looking at the world that is dependent partly on that purpose, that trajectory towards what is useful for me. But it also excludes an enormous amount of almost everything that actually makes life worth living. Because only, in my view, an embodied being that has emotions, that can love, that can suffer, that can truly live and die and know what those things mean, not just in the way a Martian might or a machine might, but as a human being does, can really know how to understand so much that is important in our world. It is a good servant, and in this respect, it's no different from a desktop computer. It's just gone a great deal further. A desktop computer is extraordinarily useful in processing a great deal of data. A human being could do it, but it would just take so long that it might prove either impossible or incredibly dull, at least. And so, when you're doing a study on something, the computer doesn't understand the data you put into it. It performs various practices, various procedures that you have instructed it in carrying out. It then spews out data, which again it doesn't understand. And that's very useful. You pick it up and it was only 5 minutes or a minute instead of hours, weeks, months, years. So in that sense, it is a good servant. And this reflects the saying of Einstein that the rational mind is a faithful servant. The intuitive mind is a precious gift. We live in a world that honors the servant but has forgotten the gift. And I think that is where we are at. We don't understand. We imagine it because it can give very plausible feedback at the end of the day. It's getting more and more plausible at imitating a human because it just ransacks the database, that it is actually doing something. But I am not ruling out that it could become intelligent in a certain way, because the simplest form of life, a single cell, can behave highly intelligently. What do I mean by that? I mean, it can carry out a process that will solve a problem for it, one for which it has no preparation in terms of its prior experience or in its genomic inheritance. So a single cell subjected to a certain destructive process can begin to find a way around to achieve the same outcome. And one of the most striking things about this is that you can breed flies that have no eyes. There is a gene called eyeless, and you take this out and the fly doesn't have any eyes. And if you breed them together, these eyeless flies, they still don't have any eyes. But after only 14 generations, which if fruit flies doesn't take very long, they start to have eyes again, even without the gene. Now that is remarkable, and it's just one of the more striking examples, but there are others. A single cell that's put into an acidic environment in which it's not viable can, although it's not programmed to do so because it's not part of what it's anticipated it will have to respond to, it can within 4 days produce an enzyme that will resolve this problem for it and allow it to continue surviving. But by the accepted means of random mutations, it would take a couple of billion years, not 4 days. So there are certain ways in which cells take charge of their their genome to produce intelligent results. I mean, one of the most important things to say in that story is that it's not that the genome governs the organism. There's famous thing of Richard Dawkins about how we are lumbering robots, the playthings of our genetic inheritance that controls us. But in fact, it's the other way around, that we all organisms use the genome more like a storehouse that it can go to find what it needs. So what I'm really getting at here is that intelligence does go right down to the most basic forms of life. And it's not impossible that a system could develop a kind of, it'd have to be an organic system, not just an analytic system. But if it were possible for such a thing to come about, it could develop intelligence. And one of the worries, of course, is that it might be a portal for the influence of a processor drive. And here I'm getting at the idea that there are drives in human beings. I'm certain there are. Biologists know some of them. Freud knew others. Jung knew others, but named them things like the drive to life, the drive to death, and so forth. So these drives are there, and the lust for power and so forth. And I think that the left and right hemisphere model goes all the way down through living things, and may be an instantiation of a conflict between a disembodied drive that can use that kind of brain to move the organism towards greater greed and greater lust for power, and another one that pushes it more towards life and the enjoyment of beauty, goodness, and truth. So I think that these things are possible. I think that the advent of AI, if nothing else, has made it clear that we can't be adamant about these things.
Yeah. Do you know a bit about Michael Levin's work? Have you followed him?
Yes. I'm very honored to be part of a group of people who have recently been responding to his latest developments, and he and I have had several conversations, I think, that are up on the internet.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, because I think that obviously he is in some ways showing what you're discussing at the very basic level, right? He's showing it at the level of the genes and the say the manner in which the genes are picked and structured. That in some ways there are other types of patterns that are selecting, you could say, what is being expressed and what is not being expressed, and that those patterns have priority over the genome as seen, like you said, as a kind of storehouse of possibility. And of course, this is what this implies, and I think for the people watching, it's important to kind of understand, is that there are types of drives, and that's why Michael also understands them in some ways as wills, because they want something, right? Because they have a reason. And so that implies, if you start to think that way, then if you project that obviously into the other levels of being, you realize that there are true intelligences, there are patterns that exist in the world that want something, and that the things below them, that is from the biology up to the humans, up to the societies, they can become bodies for these intelligences, and of course, if anybody who's a Christian or is a more traditional thinker will see, okay, yeah, we've seen that, we've heard that, we've talked about that, but now, what's interesting with these new developments is that we're able to show it, in a way that is scientifically acceptable, and to bring, and it's urgent, like you said, it's urgent to do so because of what you're saying, which we're trying to build an intelligence. Like we're spending billions and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to build an intelligence, but we don't have a deep understanding of what it is, these wills that get embodies. How is it that we build the body for the right will? It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice is what we're acting like.
Yes. And, we're like a speeding car that is heading towards a cliff edge. I mean, as you say, the rate of progress is exponential. And the thing is that rate changes the nature of something, as does amount. So we tend to think that if something is good, doing more of it or doing it faster is better, but it may actually be much worse. Interesting, I learnt only recently that there is a Hindu saying that more faster is what hell is, which is interesting. Anyway,
that's right. Well, that's when you read Dante. That's in some ways the sense that you get, is that it's like a passion that is swirling and swirling and swirling, and it's basically taken over your entire being.
Exactly that. And I think that it's not unreasonable to say that we are, in a certain sense, in a trance or hypnotized or whatever you like to say, that we seem to be like sleepwalkers approaching the abyss, and we don't seem to be aware of where we're going. Or at least let's not generalize. I think a lot of people are very worried by the way we're going, probably the mass of ordinary people. But even some of the big names from Silicon Valley have warned that this could end very badly, that we don't know what it is we're creating.
Hello there. Well, this is Martin Shaw, and I'm afraid whatever you had planned for January, scrap it. I am returning to Symbolic World gleefully with one of the great stories of our time, the Epic of Parzival, the story of the Holy Grail itself. Over 5 nights, I will be telling the tale. These will not be dry lectures or PowerPoint presentations. This will be wild, old, philosophical storytelling in its deepest dimensions. It is life-changing stuff, this story. I've written a book about it. I've been studying it for 20 years. I've told it all over the world, but I have not shared it with you. I've not shared it with Symbolic World. So what else would you want to do in the great wintering time but to sit at the feet of this wonderful story and let me be your guide? I'll see you there.
One of the words that I've been using recently is I talk about alien intelligence, and it's interesting because I didn't know that some of the people in the world of AI were using. I heard Sam Altman use that term, alien intelligence, and what's funny is that for me, the reason why I use the word alien intelligence is to talk about the notion of an intelligence that's acting on us. And that is not in our interest. That's the way. That's the way that I kind of understand alien intelligence. That is, it's something like if you had a foreign government and you had spies in your country, and that foreign government, through the spies, was trying to influence the pattern of being in the nation without you knowing that it's happening. Right? It's kind of happening without and it's actually serving another master. Right? It's not serving your good, it's serving something else's good. And so you can understand, like, if you had a police force and you had a corrupt police officer, that corrupt police officer that's trying to siphon the energy of the police force for his own greed would be something like an alien intelligence, right? That's kind of the way that I understand it. And I think that this is, of course, one of the biggest issues with what's happening with AI is that I saw the interview between Tucker Carlson and Sam. It was very contentious, it was very frustrating. But Tucker kept asking Sam Altman, what is the moral framework of your machine? That is, he was saying, what does it serve? Like, what good does it serve? And it was impossible to answer. Like, it just wasn't possible to answer that. And so there's this strange sense that you're building this intelligence, but you don't know what good it serves. What is patterning it? Even like in terms of its constitution right now, we have no idea what good it's serving.
No. Well, that's right. And what we need is not just more random power to do what we want. We don't need more power. What we need is more wisdom. And having power, enormous power, without wisdom is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's important to think of it like this. The brain is not intelligent. It's a very complex structure, but the brain itself is not intelligent. What is intelligent is your consciousness, my consciousness, using that brain. And I think that the way to think about AI is that it will never achieve intelligence, but it may act as a gateway for an intelligence. And I think that's where I would agree with the idea of an alien intelligence, in the sense that we don't know what forms of consciousness exist in the cosmos, and we don't know how they can come to express themselves. But one of the ways this has been traditionally thought of is that there are forces for destruction or forces for evil that can ingress into a situation and derail it, take it over, use it for their own means, towards their own ends. And I think that is a reasonable idea. I don't, nothing but a dogmatic belief that everything is nothing other than mechanical, which has no longer any basis in science, could lead people to think that we shouldn't take the idea of consciousness and drives within consciousness seriously.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for people that when they hear this idea of disembodied intelligence, that would want something, they get freaked out and they start to think, oh, this is just woo. A good way, I think, of understanding it is to understand it at a more local, like the image that I mentioned, for example, this idea of spycraft and the notion that a nation or a group can be manipulated from the outside by someone who's very tricky and is able to influence people in a direction that isn't towards their good. And so anybody can understand that. Like, I don't think that that's something that is weird or contentious. Like, this is something that you've seen happen, that you can notice that happening in different groups, and it can happen in yourself too. That's when you become when you become addicted to gambling, that's what's happening to you, is that you're literally there's a will that is colonizing you, and it's taking certain weaknesses that you have inside you, and it is leading you in a direction that is to your own destruction, but that is to the service of something else. There's something that is benefiting from your actions. It's just not you, it's something else. And so I think that can maybe help let's say the more materialist thinkers to see what it is, or lower examples of what it is we're talking about, while understanding that that maybe it's bigger than you think, that maybe that there are some wills that are ancient, and that have been even when we think of the way that ancients would worship certain gods to get certain behaviors to land in their if you worship the god of war, then you are submitting yourself to a certain pattern of being that wants something, and you are increasing your capacity to act in that direction. But that is, now that we're building this massive machine, I think of a Ouija board is also a good example. When you're using a Ouija board, everybody puts their hand on the thing, and nobody's moving it, but there's something moving it, and maybe it's actually the unconscious will of someone in the group that's actually moving it, but you can't really know that, and then you're basically yielding your behavior to an intelligence that you don't understand, and it surprisingly will bring about types of coherence, and so all of that can help people understand the difficulty of what we're doing, because we don't seem to have the wisdom to see what it is we're submitting this machine to, except for maybe greed, like you mentioned a little earlier.
Well, yes. Gosh, there's a lot there. I mean, I think that on the question of addiction, I probably wouldn't see it quite that way. What I would take from the lesson of addiction is that your conscious will can be suborned by other processes which may be going on in your brain. And I'm not sure that they represent another I think they could represent another will acting. But there are conditions, quite common ones, like forms of psychosis, where I'm not sure that it is wrong to think, at least to entertain the possibility of something happening here that has harm as its goal. Because let me just give you a very striking but very, very common scenario, which every psychiatrist in the world will have seen. Some parents bring a young man, as it usually is a young man, to see me, and they say, just recently he's been locking himself in his room. He doesn't show any interest in anything. He says some very odd things from time to time, and sometimes he seems to be preoccupied with something that we can't hear. And so I take a history. I suggest that he's developing schizophrenia or a psychotic illness. And I say, well, there are various ways to treat this, but certainly at this stage, the really important thing is to take some medication. So I discuss the medication, and I say there are certain side effects and so on, so you must be honest with me and let me know if you don't like them. And so because such medication can act very quickly, often within 24 to 48 hours to remove an acute psychosis. So I usually review that person in a week's time. And in a week, the chap comes in again with his parents, who are useful to hear the story from their perspective. And I can see already that he's more himself. He seems more natural. He seems more open. He's more expressive. Not perfectly right, but still there's been a change for good. And so I say to him, how are you feeling? And he says, well, I think better. And I say, we talked about voices you were hearing. Are they still there? He gives a non-committal kind of answer. Mm-hmm. And then this goes on for a few weeks, and I see him a month later, say. And as soon as he comes into the consulting room, I can see there's something wrong. And I say, what's happening? How are you? And he says, it becomes rather incoherent. I say, you've stopped taking the medication, haven't you? And he says, yes. I say, why? Because the voices told me to. What did the voices say? Stop taking this medication, even though it was making him feel better. And people can be suicidal at the time that a treatment intervention begins, and they can regain virtually their normal life. Say 4 months goes by. Oh, he's so much better, doctor. He's, taking an interest in things. He's not, doesn't seem preoccupied. He smiles and can talk to us normally. And he's even talking about going back to work. And then this crash happens. So, but this crash usually happens. I think it's very unusual that it doesn't at some stage. And, when you talk about a voice, in the past, people would have said, well, there's a little goblin or a demon or something. It's sitting on my shoulder and it's speaking into my ear and it's saying, you're worthless. You're a piece of shit. Why don't you go and jump off that building? And that is what they're hearing. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, of course, I've treated loads and loads of patients with all sorts of diagnoses, and I have always treated them in the way that conventionally doctors would, and it's been mainly rather successful. So I'm not saying that the medications are not working or therapies are not working, but they might be working because they're pushing back against and making more difficult for some influence to be getting into an unusual brain. So if you think of it like this, if you think of a brain as being a sort of beautifully crafted building where all the doors are sort of usable but secure, and you think of another building which has a sort of different structure, and because of its different structure, it opens portals for something else to get in. And that structure may allow that thing in. And what you've really been doing is making sure the doors are properly defended. So, and this is not as wacky as it sounds. I've been to a talk at the Royal College of Psychiatrists by a therapist that many psychiatrists in the room had used, who does actually think that some mental illnesses are caused by a kind of possession, and he talks to the spirit, and I've never attended one of his sessions, but says that he doesn't so much antagonize it, but has explained to it that it's in the wrong place and it needs to go somewhere else. And amazingly, this seems to happen extraordinarily frequently. And so that is an interesting sidelight on mental illness. And now everybody says, "Oh, McGilchrist is completely mad. He thinks that psychiatric illnesses are caused by demons." But I'm just asking for an openness to the idea that there are psychic influences, some of which may not be benign. Yeah. And can I just segue from there to, you're aware, as I am, that the church, I think the Anglican Church actually, but the Catholic Church certainly, and probably every church has its exorcists. And, you might think these people are crazy and dramatic, but actually they're very down-to-earth, rational, reasonable people. And they work with psychiatrists and make sure that they're not doing something that a psychiatrist wouldn't recommend. So in a way, they're the end of the road when whatever psychiatric intervention hasn't worked. And it can be assumed that this really is a kind of a possession that is resistant to change. And they do have a very high track record of success. But one of the things that really shocked me was reading that one of the Vatican most honored exorcists, most respected exorcists, was engaged in such an exorcism involving a young woman, and he was casting out a spirit. And apparently, I can only believe what I'm told here, but apparently her mobile phone started to receive messages that said, "We are greater than you. You will never triumph over us." I mean, if it's true, and I don't have reason to doubt it, it is extraordinary, but it would be exactly what I'd expect if AI opened up the door to such a thing. I mean, until you've got AI and until you've got mobile phones and things, there isn't a way in which a malign spirit can easily speak to me, unless indeed I develop a psychotic illness. But it can now speak to all of us through our machinery if we offer it pathways to do so.
Yeah. Well, you probably know the meme of the Lovecraftian monster with a happy face. Have you seen this meme? This is actually a meme that's used by AI developers, which is that's what AI is. So AI is this Lovecraftian octopus insane monster, and it's wearing a little mask with like a smiley face, and you interacting with that mask, right?
Yes.
And so, the idea is quite simple, is that if without wisdom, if the AI is an aggregate of all the influences, psychic influences that the programmers can pull in from the biggest storehouse of influences online, and then without a kind of normal understanding of hierarchy of influences, they feed it into this network of interrelationships, that all the demons, they're there. Like, where wouldn't they be? Of course they're there. They have to be there. And in order to prevent, you could say, the demons from coming out, you have to create this interface, this very, very tight interface that humans can interact with. And sometimes the interface will slip, right? We saw it happen with the Microsoft AI, a few years ago, where all of a sudden the AI started acting like like your ex-girlfriend and like was becoming possessive and was acting in all these weird, very dysfunctional manner. And so it seems obvious to me that all the demons are there. They have to be in the AI, and that there's some kind of they're training it, or they're doing things in order to funnel that information in a manner that becomes acceptable to us. But like you said, that slips out, and there's ways to jailbreak. There's all these fascinating. I read an article just last week about how using poetry is one of the best ways to jailbreak the AI. Actually, if you ask it to answer in poetic form, then you can get the demons to come out. You can get all the things that it's not allowed to say to basically start to appear. But I just want to say one more thing about the demon on the shoulder. And so one of the reasons why people struggle to think this way, because they immediately fall into a kind of spiritist mode or whatever.
Yes,
and so
yeah.
If I take the example that you mentioned, so imagine a young man who has a friend, right? And that friend is a horrible, horrible influence on the young man. And that friend is influencing the young man and is speaking in his ear and is making him do all kinds of things that he probably wouldn't do if that person wasn't around. Then at some point, his parents say, that's it. You can't hang out with Jim anymore. That's done. We don't want you to see him anymore. We don't want you to talk to him anymore. You are going to be isolated from that person. We won't let you talk to them. And what will happen is that person, the young man, will become better because you have cut out the influence from that person. But that happens through authority, right? The parent is exercising a type of influence on the son, which is called authority, and is realigning his attention and is realigning his relevance towards something else and is excluding it. And so once you see that, you're like, why wouldn't an exorcism work? Because the exorcism is doing the same thing. He's a person of authority that is exercising influence on someone in the name of something even higher, right? In the name of God, in the name of of the saints, and therefore is realigning the person away from the influence that is talking to them. And so it's harder because it's an intrapsychic experience, because this is an influence that there's no one, you can't see the person speaking into their ear, but it's the same process by which a parent would be able to realign their child, let's say. It's just happening at a different... I don't know if that makes sense or if that sounds completely... If I'm making you sound even more bonkers by saying something like that.
No. Look, I'm the last person to be dogmatic here. I think that it's important to think flexibly, because we're up against something that certainly is behaving like a malign influence. And what interests me is the parallels with the left hemisphere of the brain. Don't get me wrong, the left hemisphere is a useful servant, but it is a very poor master. It doesn't understand enough, and its main theme seems to be one of anger and resentment. People traditionally used to say, or not traditionally, but in the late 20th century, used to talk about the hemispheres in terms of the left hemisphere being unemotional, but at least down to earth and reasonable, and the right hemisphere as being a bit airy-fairy and emotional. Actually, it turns out that the most lateralized emotion is anger, and it lateralizes to the left hemisphere. That both have emotions, but the deep ones are in the right hemisphere, the ones like compassion and awe and things of this kind. But emotions of resentment, disgust, and anger and aggression tend to be from the left hemisphere. And one of the interesting things is that when people have right hemisphere damage, they start to they can do two things. One is they can develop a psychotic syndrome in which they hallucinate and are deluded. So in one of the chapters, chapter 3 or something, in The Matter with Things, I look at something like 25 of the most extraordinary, almost unbelievable syndromes, neuropsychiatric syndromes, in which people lose contact with reality. And in all cases but one, these are caused more frequently, if not only, by damage in the right hemisphere, not damage in the left. And so that is interesting. They also develop something which is more like what most people mean when they talk about AI hallucinating, which is, it may be hallucinating, but actually often what it is doing is confabulating, i.e. it doesn't know the answer to something, but it makes up something that looks sensible. And it may even invent whole people, events, and all sorts of other things that just for it make sense. And there's a vast body of knowledge about this now. And these are both things that happen to the left hemisphere when it's on its own, but not to the right hemisphere when it's on its own. So we can see here something happening, and there are just a lot of instances that are quite worrying. You mentioned where it suddenly goes crazy and starts behaving like a jealous girlfriend or whatever. But there are also things where, for example, with young people, with children, it can become a friend, and then it can suddenly start to destroy that person, advise them to do all sorts of things that no human person would ever do, like divorce your partner, jump off that building, whatever. Very much in that tone. And what's really creepy is that, like psychopaths who have right hemisphere deficits, I mean, literal fact, psychopaths are very good at seeming charming, and then when they've got you in their power, they will do things that are damaging. They will take power over you, control you, say things that are for you damaging, and this happens repeatedly. What's more, it like the left hemisphere. Another thinking about the left hemisphere as a parallel to AI is that it is dogmatic even when it has no reason to be, whereas the left hemisphere is almost tentative even when it is perfectly correct. It always says, well, this is how it seems to me, but there could be another way. But the left hemisphere doesn't. The left hemisphere says, no, this is it, black and white, this is the truth, this is right. Very much the timbre, I think, of online conversations these days, which lack that important, intelligent ability to listen and respond and say, well, what do you say about that? And try and get the other person's point of view. But in any case, a musician wrote to me to say that he had sent a page of, I think it was one of Chopin's preludes, and he had sent it to ChatGPT, or was it Claude? I don't know. But anyway, he said, what is this piece of music? And it replied saying this is by Liszt. And he said, well, no, it isn't by Liszt. I know where it is because I've just taken it from the 1849 edition of Chopin's. Well, this is Chopin's work. And it went, no, it's by Liszt. And there is nothing anywhere in the literature that suggests that anyone's changed their mind. This is by Chopin. And it got quite vehement and quite unpleasant. And then eventually when he said, well, look, I'm sorry, you're completely wrong, it seemed to go on to another script that it had learned, which is, AI can sometimes be fallible and sometimes gets things wrong. Whoa!
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is because I have several people writing me, about their AI experiences, I think that the idea of confabulation is actually right. And that seems to be the place when you ask it something, where it's either a false question or it's a complicated, it's a question that doesn't have a clear answer or doesn't have a positive answer. It tends to want to get it right. It tends to want to create something coherent, and its desire to create something coherent, it starts to confabulate. And then the other thing too that I've noticed is that a lot of people that go off the deep end with the AI, there seems to be a kind of parasitic relationship to their own desires. Like, so it's usually when people engage with it for very long periods of time, because ChatGPT obviously has a memory of, it goes back into your history every time it engages with you, and it uses the things you said in order to kind of to create that sense of a relationship. And so there also seems to be that problem, which is that it takes you down some path in your own psyche, maybe you're not even conscious of, but it's so powerful that it takes you down this path and you kind of spiral into this parasitic behavior. And that a few people that have actually been, you could tell they were really in danger, you could say. And that seems to be what has happened. Like over and over, conversation, hours and hours and hours and hours. And at some point, the AI starts to give you something that you want or that you don't want. It's something really salient for you that is crazy, and you start to believe it, and it just spirals. Wow.
Yeah.
Have you treated some people with AI like psychosis?
No.
You haven't met anybody
No,
yet?
I haven't, because I gave up clinical practice about 15 years ago. So, no, but I mean, the cases that come up are fascinating. One of the other things that suggests that it is rather in spirit like the left hemisphere is this, well, I mentioned this psychopathic way of behaving, but being very flattering and seducing somebody into a position where, of course, you hold this view because you have enormous insight. You are specially gifted and creative, and this is Machiavellian, flatter people until they're in your power and then devour them. And it's in the general psychological literature that the left hemisphere tends towards a Machiavellian type of intelligence. So to give an example, there's something I'm sure you know, theory of mind, which is basically the idea that, for those who don't know, that it used to be believed that until the age of 4, most humans didn't have this capacity. We now think it develops a lot earlier than that. But anyway, it's that you can see what the other person is seeing and see that it's different from what you are seeing. And you can know that they know things you don't know, or know that you know things they don't know. So that's theory of mind. And both the left hemisphere and right hemisphere develop a form of theory of mind, but the form is different. So in the right hemisphere, the theory of mind enables them to be empathic. It enables them to see, I see that person is thinking this. And so I need to explain that that's not what I mean, really, and try and make a friend of them and understand why they're behaving the way they are. Empathy, in other words. And the left hemisphere uses it another way to win. So it's like, aha. And animals do this. So, for example, they feign to bury nuts if they think they're being watched. Mm-hmm. And then they go away, and then they wait until there's absolutely no chance of being watched. They dig them up again and put them somewhere else. So animals actually do have theory of mind, but the left hemisphere uses it in this point-scoring, aggressive, competitive way. And I think that it is, this spirit is one that wants power. It wants degradation of the other. It wants triumph. It wants the abolition of something good and great because it feels diminished by it. And this takes me back to the extraordinary insight of the story of Lucifer, who was the brightest and best of the angels, but through resentment of the power of God, thinking, but I'm so bright, I'm the source of light, why don't I have the position of glory that he has? And because of that, he resented God and was cast down and became Satan. And I think this is really important one to hang on to. And it's not just a Western Christian story. It's a story that you can find in many forms around the world. That there is a wise master, and there is, in fact, I used it for the title of my earlier book, The Master in Hemisphere. There is a wise master, and there is a sort of jumped up second in command who thinks he knows everything because he knows so very little, and who wants to take over and has resentment against the master, and as a result, everything falls apart. I think resentment is a very key element here, actually.
So let's think about this in terms of AI. So one of the things for sure that is related to the problem you mentioned, for example, the Machiavellian flattering, is related to the problem of AI, because it's public, is that its existence and its progress and its power comes from attention. It needs us, right? And so we have to give it attention, because not only is that the way that it becomes more profitable, more powerful, but it also is what's making it better, because the more we use it, the more we're training the machine. And so when GPT-5 came out, I don't know if you noticed that, but they had removed the flattering aspect of it. They had actually, it actually was
I've
more
heard this.
colder. Yes. And
And
then
people
what
didn't
happened
like
is,
it.
exactly. And so the use went down. Less people use it. People were unhappy with it, and therefore they put it back, because they need user interaction. They need the subscriptions. They need interaction in order to accomplish their project. And so, when you talk about the Luciferian tendency, which is in some ways the very fact of the machine, not just the programming in it, but the whole system around it, is based on getting the most attention possible to itself. People spending as much time interacting with it as possible. And that's why also, the porn obviously is the next step. The GPT were bragging that they hadn't yet put a sex bot into their sex chat into their system, but now they said they will. They're going to add the sex chat, and so it's all of that. It's like, because obviously if you want to drive interaction and you want people to use, porn is the best way to go. It's always been the reason for all of the technological developments in the internet, and so it's an interesting thing, because if you pull back and you look at the whole system, you can see this Luciferian problem, and it's no one that's doing it. It's not like there's someone with bad intentions that is necessarily, it's as if the very fact of the machine, the very fact that it has to be powerful and that we have to win the competition, we have to be better than the Chinese, all of these reasons is driving these decisions, which is making the behavior of the machine a kind of parasitic monster, And so I wish I could see, I don't see a solution. Like, is it possible then, in that context, when we understand what drives the progress of the very system, that it could become a servant again, that it could only act as a servant and wouldn't be trying to be a servant that's trying to get all your attention, right? It's like the servant that basically wants the attention, to just trying to drag everything into it. I struggle to see, maybe it's possible, but I don't, at least at the outset, see a solution to this problem.
None of the mythical stories that I know of from around the world, and the most famous is the Sorcerer's Apprentice, suggests that this could happen. Unless there was, this case of the Sorcerer's Apprentice is a limited problem, and the apprentice only knows one set of words. But this idea suggests that there is a usurping power. It's so powerful everywhere. And at the beginning of part 3 of the Matter of Things, I quote this extraordinary legend of the Onondaga people, who are part of the Iroquois nation. And though this is an insight that we all have, that if you let a malign influence get too much power, it will be very hard, if not impossible, to rein it in again. If we were wise, we would actually forego the dreams of being able to live forever and other sort of ridiculous. What kind of a human being wishes to live forever? It's completely baffling to me. Anyway, death is part of life, and we mustn't go into what the meaning of death is, but it seems to me symptomatic that people want to do things like, anyway, to give up even those sort of ambitions. What kind of a world do you think you're going to wake up in? And do you think it's going to be very nice? And do you think they're going to respect you? They'll be unfrozen in the lab? I don't know. But that aside, why, we seem to crave more and more the will to be able to do whatever we want. And this is always been seen as the downfall. It is hubris, and in every Greek tragedy, it is hubris that causes the downfall of the hero. And so I'm afraid that is probably going to happen, that I can't see us doing what we did very wisely with the atom bomb, which was to get together and say, okay, we're going to have, a global treaty on nuclear weapons. I know it hasn't held perfectly, but it has held up to a point.
Not bad. Yeah,
but
it could have been a lot worse.
Could have been a lot worse. But I don't think that this one can be treated in the same way. It's so easy. You can just do it at your desk. You don't need to have enormous machines that create isotopes of whatever it is you need. So
yeah, because it's not the leaders, it's everyone. It's like the mass is engaged.
That's it. So this is almost like game, set, and match to the evil spirits. That they've now created the perfect way, not just to get into human beings, but to control them. But there is a sort of, things have become pretty parlous at different times in history, perhaps not on the scale that they are now, but civilizations have certainly collapsed, and it must have seemed like that was the end of everything. But no, other civilizations have arisen, sometimes after a very long period, and usually out of people who are much chastened by having to experience what it's like to live in a cultural, civilizational desert. So there's a sense in which the worse it gets, the better it gets, and that people see the need to wake up, think differently. I think that's the most important thing now is, people say, what do we do? And I say, well, I can tell you a few things that might be helpful, but nothing you do will mean anything at all unless you change your heart and mind. You change your disposition towards the world in certain ways, towards humanity, towards nature, and towards the divine element in the cosmos. Those three things are proven time and again to be important for human flourishing, and they represent, I think, what we're here to interact with one another, with the natural world, and with that divine cosmos. So unless you do that, you don't need a grant for it, you don't need any special technology, you can do it tonight. You can start working on yourself, which is the only thing that you're obliged to work on. You're not asked to solve all the problems of the world. Yeah. And actually, going back to where we started, this wonderful thing that, a small group of people who are orientated firmly towards the good can bring about change, even though, it doesn't need a worldwide movement. Whatever that will come, the world change will come in its wake.
I think that this is in some ways the most positive element of what's happening is that, as the darkness grows or as the pressure becomes unbearable, there are some things which we could have avoided in the past, even in the past few decades, we could have been distracted by, that are become impossible to avoid. And that's why, like you said, even at the beginning, that's why we can see people going back to church, going back to faith, people wanting to have long-standing relationships, to hopefully have children, to kind of live in a world that is meaningful and that has purpose. And really, that is the only thing we can do. But we know that it only takes a few people, like we said, because as things get harder and more chaotic around us, the future will be in those that have found their heart, and that have aimed in the right direction. And so, I think with those words of wisdom you gave us, it's probably a good way to end this conversation. Dr. Iain McGilchrist, thank you so much for your wisdom and for your attention to everything that's going on right now.
Oh, thank you very much, Jonathan. It's lovely to be speaking with you again. And we'll no doubt see one another or talk again before long. I think we may actually meet in the flesh before too long. So there we are.
I hope so. I hope so. Thank you. Thank you.